On the evening of April 9, 1996, an 18-year-old boy named Huugjilt made a decision that would cost him his life. He discovered a woman's body in a public toilet at a textile factory in Hohhot, Inner Mongolia. She had been raped and strangled to death. Hugjilt did what any responsible person would do. He immediately called the police to report what he had found. 61 days later, he was executed by firing squad. But Hugjilt was innocent. Police extracted a confession from him through torture. The interrogation was brutal, designed to break a terrified teenager who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. On May 23, 1996, Hugjilt was sentenced to death. His appeal was rejected. 61 days after discovering the body, he was executed. He was still 18 years old. But here's what nobody knew at the time. The real killer was still out there, and he was watching. His name was Zhihong. By April 1996, at the age of 23, Zhao had become a predator. The woman Hugjilt found was named Yang. It was his first known murder. And then Zhao watched as the wrong person was arrested, watched as an innocent boy was tortured into confessing, watched as the Chinese justice system, desperate to solve the case quickly, executed Hugjilt for a crime he did not commit. Perhaps that's when Zhao learned the most dangerous lesson a serial killer can learn, that he could get away with murder, that the system was so broken, so focused on speed over accuracy, that he could continue killing without consequence. And that's exactly what he did. For 9 years after Hugjilt's execution, Zhihong continued his reign of terror across Inner Mongolia. He killed again in May 2000. Then came 2005, the year his violence escalated dramatically. In January alone, he murdered twice, first on January 2nd, then again on January 7th. On February 24th, another victim. In July 2005, he killed for what would be the final time. The final count was staggering. Between 1996 and 2005, Zhihong committed 21 separate crimes, 10 murders, 13 rapes, including 2 girls under the age of 14, multiple robberies and thefts. For nearly a decade, he was a predator, hunting in plain sight. The people of Hohhot and nearby Ulankab lived in fear. Police offered a reward of 2,000 yuan for information about the killer's identity. But Zhao remained free, continuing to destroy lives while the Chinese government celebrated having solved the first murder by executing an innocent boy. On October 23, 2005, police finally arrested Zhihong. He confessed immediately to more than 20 crimes. He provided detailed accounts of his murders, his rapes, his methods. In a 2005 interview with China Central Television, Zhao revealed a chilling glimpse into his mind. "I am not me but another man when I commit crimes. At that time, I am as grim as devil." But the confession that would shake China to its core came later. On December 5, 2006, Zhao wrote a document titled Petition of My Death Penalty. In it, he confessed to the April 1996 murder of Yang, the textile worker whose death had led to Hugjilt's execution. This is the story of Zhihong, the man they called the Smiling Killer, because he smiled in court while facing judgment for his crimes. But this isn't just the story of one serial killer. It's the story of how China's justice system, under pressure to appear tough on crime, executed an innocent teenager and gave a monster 9 years of freedom. It's the story of 10 murders that didn't have to happen, 13 rapes that could have been prevented, and one innocent boy whose only crime was calling the police. What you're about to hear will reveal how a broken system allowed evil to flourish. A case so shocking that it would eventually lead 27 government officials to be punished and force China to confront the deep flaws in its criminal justice system. To understand how this catastrophe happened, we must first understand the environment in which it occurred. An environment where speed mattered more than truth, where confessions mattered more than evidence, and where political pressure turned justice into a deadly numbers game. To understand how an innocent 18-year-old could be executed for a crime he did not commit, we must first understand the legal and political environment of China in the mid-1990s. In 1996, China was in the midst of a major national campaign known as Strike Hard against criminal activities. This campaign had been initiated by President Jiang Zemin and was designed to demonstrate the government's commitment to maintaining law and order during a period of rapid social and economic change. The Strike Hard campaign placed enormous pressure on public security departments, prosecutors, and courts to take swift and severe measures in dealing with criminal cases. The emphasis was on speed and severity. Police departments were expected to solve cases quickly. Prosecutors were expected to secure convictions rapidly, and courts were expected to hand down harsh sentences without delay. In cases involving serious crimes like rape and murder, the entire process from arrest to execution could be completed in a matter of weeks. This rush to judgment was not accidental. Authorities at the Hohhot level later admitted that there was an explicit quota of criminal cases to conclude, and this quota directly influenced the treatment of suspects like Hugjilt. Police departments that failed to meet their quotas faced criticism and potential consequences, while those that exceeded their quotas received praise and promotions. China Daily, one of the country's official English-language newspapers, would later publish an opinion article about the Huugjilt case that laid bare the systemic problems. The article stated bluntly, "It has not been rare for higher authorities to exert pressure on local public security departments and judiciary to crack serious murder cases, nor has it been rare for the police to extort confessions through torture." In this environment, the rights of suspects were often trampled. The presumption of innocence, a cornerstone of modern legal systems, was effectively reversed. Suspects were presumed guilty, and their confessions, obtained through whatever means necessary, were considered sufficient evidence for conviction. The use of torture to extract confessions was widespread. Police officers knew that a confession was the fastest way to close a case, and they were willing to use violence to obtain one. Suspects who protested their innocence were often beaten until they confessed. Those who recanted their confessions in court were rarely believed. Defense lawyers, when they existed at all, had limited ability to challenge the prosecution's case. Courts were expected to hand down convictions, not to carefully weigh evidence and consider reasonable doubt. Appeals were often perfunctory, with higher courts rubber-stamping the decisions of lower courts. This was the system that Hugjilt encountered when he reported finding Yang's body on April 9, 1996. A system that valued speed over accuracy, confessions over evidence, and convictions over justice. A system that would torture him into confessing, convict him in a rushed trial, and execute him in just 61 days. And this was the system that allowed Zhihong to continue killing for 9 more years. Zhihong was born on September 5, 1972, in Inner Mongolia. Little is publicly known about his childhood or early life, as Chinese authorities typically do not release detailed biographical information about criminals. What is certain is that by April 1996, at the age of 23, Zhao had become a predator. On April 9, 1996, Zhao committed what investigators would later confirm as his first known murder. His target was a young woman surnamed Yang, a worker at a textile factory in Hohhot. Yang was in her 20s, an ordinary working woman trying to make a living in post-reform China. The details of exactly how Zhao selected Yang as his victim are not fully known, but what is clear is that he followed her to a public toilet at the textile factory. Public toilets in Chinese industrial facilities of that era were typically simple concrete structures, often poorly lit and offering little security. They were vulnerable locations, and Zhao knew it. Inside the toilet, Zhao attacked Yang. He raped her and then strangled her to death. Her body was left in the toilet, where it would soon be discovered. Hugjilt, the 18-year-old factory worker, found Yang's body and immediately contacted authorities. It was approximately 7:30 p.m. when he made the call. Police arrived at the scene and began their investigation. What happened next would haunt China's legal system for decades. Rather than conducting a thorough investigation, police quickly focused their suspicions on Huugjilt himself. Their reasoning was brutally simple. He had discovered the body, he had been in the area, and therefore he must be the killer. Hugjilt was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. The interrogation began immediately. Police officers, under intense pressure from the Strike Hard campaign to solve the case quickly, used torture to break the young man. The torture continued for hours. Hugjilt maintained his innocence, insisting that he had simply found the body and reported it. But the police needed a confession, and they were willing to do whatever it took to get one. Within 48 hours, Hugjilt confessed. The confession, obtained under duress and torture, became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case against him. The trial was a mockery of justice. On May 23, 1996, just 44 days after Yang's murder, Hugjilt was sentenced to death by the Hohhot Intermediate People's Court. His defense attorney, if he had one at all, was unable to mount an effective challenge to the prosecution's case. The confession, despite having been obtained through torture, was accepted as valid evidence. Hugjilt appealed his conviction to the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Regional Higher People's Court. The appeal was rejected. The higher court approved the death penalty without conducting any meaningful review of the evidence. On June 10, 1996, exactly 61 days after Yang's body was discovered, Hugjilt was taken to an execution ground and shot to death. He was still 18 years old. His entire adult life had lasted just 61 days from the moment he found Yang's body to the moment he was executed for her murder. The speed of Hugjilt's execution was not unusual for the time. Under the Strike Hard campaign, rapid executions were seen as a deterrent to crime. The message was clear: commit a serious crime and you will be caught, convicted, and executed quickly. The problem, of course, was that the person being executed might be innocent. Hugjilt's parents, Li Sanren and Shang Aiyun, were devastated. Their son had been executed as a rapist and murderer, branded as one of society's worst criminals. The stigma attached to their family was enormous. In Chinese society, the crimes of an individual reflect on their entire family. Li and Shang now had to live with the shame of having raised a son who was supposedly a rapist and killer. But they never believed their son was guilty. They knew Hugjilt, knew his character, and could not accept that he had committed such a terrible crime. For years, they would fight to clear his name, to prove that the justice system had made a terrible mistake. Meanwhile, Zhao Zhihong was free. He had successfully committed murder and watched as another man was executed for his crime. The experience may have emboldened him, teaching him that he could kill without consequence. The Chinese justice system, in its rush to appear tough on crime, had not only executed an innocent boy, but had also given a serial killer the confidence to continue his predatory behavior. In the aftermath of Yang's murder and Hugjilt's execution, Zhihong did not immediately kill again, but he did continue his criminal activities, establishing a pattern of violence and theft that would characterize his 9-year reign of terror. On May 19, 1996, just over a month after murdering Yang, Zhao committed a violent robbery. His victim was a man surnamed Qi, who lived in a residential area in Hohhot. Zhao attacked Qi, using violence or threats to steal his property. This crime demonstrated that Zhao was not solely focused on sexual violence against women, but was willing to commit a variety of crimes to satisfy his needs. Between 1998 and 2000, Zhao engaged in multiple thefts. He stole cash and property worth thousands of yuan from various victims. These were not sophisticated crimes, but rather opportunistic thefts that allowed Zhao to supplement his income. He was a career criminal, taking what he wanted through stealth or violence. Then, on May 20, 2000, 4 years after his first murder, Zhao killed again. His victim was a young girl in the Hohhot area. Zhao raped her and then murdered her, using the same brutal methods he had employed against Yang. The case remained unsolved for years, with police unable to identify the killer. This 4-year gap between Zhao's first and second murders is notable. Serial killers often go through periods of dormancy during which they do not kill. These gaps can be caused by various factors: fear of being caught, changes in life circumstances, or psychological factors. In Zhao's case, it is possible that witnessing Hugjilt's execution for his crime had temporarily satisfied his violent urges, or that he had been careful to avoid suspicion. But by 2000, Zhao was killing again, and this time there would be no long gaps. The murder of the young girl in May 2000 marked the beginning of a new, more intense phase of his criminal career. The year 2005 would prove to be the bloodiest of Zhao's killing spree. On January 2, 2005, he raped and murdered his third victim. Just 5 days later, on January 7th, he killed again. The rapid succession of these murders suggests that Zhao was escalating, that his need to kill was becoming more urgent and less controllable. On February 24, 2005, Zhao struck again, claiming a fourth victim in his 2005 killing spree. By this point, local authorities were in a state of panic. It was clear that a serial killer was operating in their jurisdiction, targeting women with terrifying frequency. The police launched a major investigation. They offered a reward of 2,000 yuan for information about the killer's identity and whereabouts. This was a significant sum in 2005 China, especially in Inner Mongolia, and demonstrated the seriousness with which authorities were taking the threat. The people of Hohhot and the nearby city of Ulankab lived in fear. Women were afraid to go out alone, especially at night. Families warned their daughters to be careful, to avoid isolated areas, to always be aware of their surroundings. The community knew that a predator was hunting among them, but they did not know who he was or when he would strike next. In July 2005, Zhihong killed for what would be the final time. His last victim fell to the same brutal pattern: rape followed by murder. By this point, Zhao had been killing and raping for 9 years. His reign of terror had lasted from April 1996 to July 2005. The final tally of Zhao's confirmed crimes was staggering. Between 1996 and 2005, he had committed 21 separate criminal acts. These included 10 murders and 13 rapes. 2 of his rape victims were girls under the age of 14, meaning that Zhao had not only raped and murdered adult women, but had also preyed on children. In addition to his murders and rapes, Zhao had also committed multiple robberies and thefts. Using violence or threats, he had stolen property worth over 31,000 yuan. He had also burglarized another 3,500 yuan worth of goods. He was not just a serial killer and rapist, but a comprehensive predator who took what he wanted through violence, intimidation, and stealth. By the summer of 2005, police in Inner Mongolia were under enormous pressure to catch the serial killer who had been terrorizing their communities. The murders were creating panic, damaging the reputation of local authorities, and raising questions about public safety. Investigators began to compile a profile of the killer. They analyzed the crime scenes, looking for patterns and commonalities. They interviewed witnesses and reviewed surveillance footage. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. On October 23, 2005, after months of intensive investigation, police finally arrested Zhihong. The specific details of his arrest, including what evidence led police to identify him as the suspect, have not been fully disclosed by Chinese authorities. What is known is that once Zhao was in custody, he began to confess. Zhao's confessions came quickly and in detail. He admitted to committing more than 20 crimes between 1996 and 2005. He provided specific information about his victims, the locations of his crimes, and his methods. His willingness to confess was notable, though his motives for doing so remain unclear. In a 2005 interview with China Central Television, Zhao provided a chilling glimpse into his psychology. He told the interviewer, "I am not me but another man when I commit crimes. At that time, I am as grim as devil." This statement suggested a man who compartmentalized his violence, who could transform from an ordinary citizen into a merciless killer. It also hinted at a possible dissociative state, where Zhao felt disconnected from his own actions during his crimes. Zhao's confessions included admitting to 11 murders and 10 rapes committed between 1996 and 2005. He described his victims in detail, providing information that only the killer could know. This level of detail convinced investigators that they had finally caught the right man. But the most shocking confession was yet to come. On December 5, 2006, more than a year after his arrest, Zhao wrote a formal document titled Petition of My Death Penalty. In this petition, Zhao confessed to the April 1996 murder of the textile worker Yang. He admitted that he had raped and strangled her in the public toilet at the textile factory. This was the very crime for which Hugjilt had been tortured, convicted, and executed. Zhao's confession to Yang's murder created an immediate crisis for the Chinese justice system. It meant that an innocent teenager had been executed for a crime he did not commit. It meant that the police had tortured a confession out of an innocent boy. It meant that the courts had rushed to judgment without properly examining the evidence. And it meant that the real killer had walked free for 9 years, during which time he had murdered at least 9 more people and raped 13 women and girls. The confession was a bombshell. For Hugjilt's parents, Li Sanren and Shang Ayun, it was vindication of what they had always believed. Their son was innocent. For the Chinese public, it was proof of the deep flaws in the country's criminal justice system. And for the authorities in Inner Mongolia, it was a source of profound embarrassment and a potential threat to their legitimacy. Zhao's first trial began in late 2006, shortly after his confession to Yang's murder. He was charged with raping and killing 9 women and girls, 7 additional counts of rape, as well as robbery and larceny committed between 1996 and 2005. During the trial, Zhao insisted repeatedly that he was guilty of a 10th murder, the 1996 murder of Yang. Zhao's insistence on confessing to Yang's murder alerted the central government in Beijing to the possibility of a major miscarriage of justice. The regional higher court suspended the proceedings against Zhao while officials reviewed the Huugjilt case. Zhao remained in detention, awaiting a resolution. This suspension of Zhao's trial was highly unusual. Typically, once a defendant is charged and brought to trial, the proceedings move forward quickly. The decision to suspend Zhao's trial indicated that higher authorities were taking the potential wrongful execution very seriously. For the next several years, Zhao sat in detention while 2 parallel processes unfolded. The first was the re-examination of Huugijilt's case to determine whether he had been wrongfully convicted and executed. The second was the continuation of the case against Zhao himself for all of his confirmed crimes. While Zhao Zhihong sat in detention, Huugijilt's parents began their long campaign to clear their son's name. Li Sanren and Shang Aiyun had lived for years with the stigma of having a son executed as a rapist and murderer. Now, with Zhao's confession, they finally had proof of what they had always known. Hugjilt was innocent. The couple faced significant obstacles in their quest for justice. The Chinese legal system does not easily admit mistakes, especially mistakes as grave as the wrongful execution of an innocent person. Government officials who had been involved in Huugijilt's case had a vested interest in maintaining that the original conviction was correct. Some of these officials had even been promoted based on their handling of the case. Nevertheless, Li and Shang persisted. They filed petitions, gave interviews to Chinese media, and sought the support of lawyers and legal reformers. Their case became a cause célèbre among legal activists in China, who saw it as a prime example of the need for judicial reform. The pressure eventually became too great for authorities to ignore. Between November and December 2014, nearly 19 years after Huugijilt's execution, the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Regional Higher People's Court agreed to reopen his case. The court conducted a thorough review of all evidence related to the original conviction. The review revealed shocking deficiencies in the original investigation and trial. The court established that in his forced confession, Hugjilt had not been able to correctly describe the crime itself. He had not accurately described the physical appearance of victim Yang. He had not correctly identified her accent. These failures strongly suggested that Huugjilt had no personal knowledge of the crime and had simply been telling his interrogators what they wanted to hear. The court also found that Huugijilt's confession had been obtained through torture. The use of torture to extract confessions is prohibited under Chinese law, and confessions obtained through torture are supposed to be excluded from evidence. However, in 1996, under the pressure of the Strike Hard campaign, such legal niceties were often ignored. On December 15, 2014, the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Regional Higher People's Court issued its ruling. Hugjilt was posthumously exonerated. The court ruled that he was not guilty of rape and murder, finding that the facts of his case were unclear and the evidence was inadequate to support a conviction. After 18 years, Huugijilt's name was finally cleared. The exoneration made headlines across China. The BBC reported on the case, calling it one of the most high-profile wrongful execution cases in recent Chinese history. The Xinhua news agency, China's official state news service, described the case as one of the most scandalous instances of injustice in China over the past decade. The Chinese government awarded Hugjilt's parents compensation totaling 2,059,621.4 yuan. At the exchange rate of the time, this amounted to more than 332,000 US dollars. The compensation was intended to cover the period of Hugjilt's detention before his execution, his wrongful death, the suffering experienced by his parents, and the funeral expenses they had incurred. While the compensation was substantial by Chinese standards, Li and Shang made clear that no amount of money could bring back their son. In interviews with Chinese media, they expressed gratitude for the exoneration, but also anger at the officials who had been responsible for their son's wrongful execution. In a deeply moving gesture that spoke to traditional Chinese beliefs about honoring the deceased, Hugjilt's family brought a copy of the exoneration notice to his grave. They burned the document there, a traditional way of communicating with the deceased in Chinese culture. This ritual allowed them to symbolically tell Huugjilt that his name had been cleared, that he had been officially recognized as innocent, and that his family's long struggle for justice had finally succeeded. The exoneration of Huugjilt had significant repercussions for officials who had been involved in his case. Authorities in Inner Mongolia announced that 27 government officials would be punished in connection with the wrongful execution. The most serious consequences fell on Feng Jiming, who had been the chief of the Xincheng District Police Branch of Hohhot at the time of Hugjilt's arrest. Feng had been directly responsible for the investigation that led to Hugjilt's conviction. Ironically, Feng had actually been promoted based on his handling of the case, which was seen at the time as a successful example of quickly solving a serious crime. Following the exoneration, Feng was placed under investigation for bribery, dereliction of duty, and obtaining confessions through torture. He was added to a blacklist with the possibility of criminal prosecution. This was a significant fall from grace for a man who had once been praised for his police work. However, many observers, including Hugjilt's parents, felt that the punishments were far too lenient. Li and Shang argued that officials who had been directly responsible for torturing their son and rushing him to execution should face more severe consequences. Legal activists and reform advocates agreed, arguing that without serious accountability, similar miscarriages of justice would continue to occur. The case became a widely discussed topic on Sina Weibo, China's popular social media platform. Lawyers, legal scholars, and ordinary citizens engaged in active debate about what the case revealed about China's criminal justice system and what reforms were needed. The discussion was notable for its candor, with many commenters openly criticizing the police, prosecutors, and judges who had been involved in Hugjilt's case. With Hugjilt finally exonerated, attention turned back to Zhihong and the question of what punishment he should receive for his crimes. On January 5, 2015, more than 8 years after his original trial began, proceedings resumed at the Hohhot Intermediate People's Court. Zhao, now 42 years old, faced an extensive list of charges. He was accused of multiple counts of murder, rape, robbery, and larceny committed over a 9-year period. The trial was divided into 2 sessions to address the different categories of crimes. The morning session was open to the public and focused on Zhao's charges of robbery, and theft. Prosecutors presented detailed evidence of how Zhao had robbed Qi in May 1996, attacking him in a residential area and stealing his property. They also outlined the multiple thefts Zhao had committed between 1998 and 2000, stealing cash and property worth thousands of yuan from various victims. Zhao confessed to most of these allegations during the morning session. However, he denied stealing a gold ring, one of the items he was accused of taking. His lawyers, Xi Fei and Zhang Ruijun, argued that evidence regarding some of the theft charges was inadequate and should not be used to support a conviction. The afternoon session was closed to the public for privacy reasons, as it dealt with the rape and murder charges. These were the most serious charges Zhao faced, and they were also the most sensitive. The victims' families had a right to privacy, and Chinese courts typically close proceedings when sexual assault cases are being heard. Among those in attendance at the trial were Hugjilt's parents, Li Sanren and Shang Aiyun. They had waited nearly 2 decades to see the man who had actually committed the crime for which their son was executed. Their presence in the courtroom was a powerful reminder of the human cost of Zhao's crimes and the justice system's failures. Notably absent from the trial were members of Zhao's own family. Unlike many criminal defendants in China, who are typically supported by family members during their trials, Zhao sat alone with his lawyers. Whether his family had disowned him or simply chosen not to attend is not clear, but their absence was remarked upon by observers. Throughout the trial, Zhao's lawyers told reporters that their client continued to insist he was responsible for the 1996 murder of Yang. Zhao seemed to believe that by admitting to this crime and expressing remorse for the fact that an innocent person had been executed in his place, he might earn some leniency from the court. His lawyers may have advised him that showing remorse and taking responsibility could potentially reduce his sentence. On February 9, 2015, the Hohhot Intermediate People's Court announced its verdict. According to the court's findings, Zhihong had committed 21 crimes between 1996 and 2005 in Hohhot and Ulaanbaatar. These crimes had resulted in the deaths of 10 people and the rape of 13 women and girls. He had also used violence or threats to steal property worth 31,400 yuan and had burglarized another 3,500 yuan worth of goods. The court found that Zhao's motives were despicable, his methods were cruel, and the consequences of his crimes were severe. Despite his confessions to some of the crimes and his expression of remorse regarding Hugjilt's wrongful execution, the court refused to show any leniency. Zhihong was sentenced to death. The court also deprived him of political rights for life, meaning that even if he were somehow to avoid execution, he would never again have the right to vote or participate in Chinese political life. He was fined 53,000 yuan payable to the state. Additionally, he was ordered to pay 102,168 yuan in compensation to the families of his victims. The death sentence was not surprising, given the severity and number of Zhao's crimes. In China, multiple murders combined with rape are among the most serious crimes, and the death penalty is routinely applied in such cases. Zhao appealed the verdict. In his appeal, he called on the court to show mercy, citing the fact that he had confessed to the crime for which Hugjilt was wrongly executed. His lawyers argued that this confession demonstrated genuine remorse and should be considered a mitigating factor. On May 10, 2015, the highest court of the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region rejected Zhao's appeal and upheld the death sentence. In its ruling, the court emphasized Zhao's despicable motives, cruel measures, and the serious consequences of his crimes. The court found that Zhao's confession regarding Huugjilt's case, while noteworthy, did not outweigh the severity of his crimes or justify any reduction in his sentence. Under Chinese law, all death penalty cases must be reviewed by the Supreme People's Court before an execution can be carried out. This review process can take several years, during which the condemned prisoner remains on death row. Zhao would spend more than 4 additional years in prison awaiting the Supreme People's Court's final decision on his case. Zhao Zhihong remained on death row for over 4 years while the Supreme People's Court conducted its mandatory review of his case. During this time, he was held in a prison in Inner Mongolia, awaiting his fate. The Supreme People's Court review was thorough. Between September 1996 and July 2005, the SPC confirmed Zhao had conducted 17 crimes consisting of intentional homicide, rape, robbery, and larceny in multiple locations across Inner Mongolia. These crimes involved the murder of 6 people whose deaths could be directly attributed to Zhao's actions. They also involved the rape of 2 girls under the age of 14, as well as 10 other women. The distinction between 10 total murders and 6 confirmed deaths directly caused by Zhao may reflect different legal standards for attribution of causation, or may indicate that some victims died from injuries sustained during assaults, while others were directly killed by Zhao. Regardless of the precise legal categorization, the scale of Zhao's crimes was horrific. On the morning of July 30, 2019, Zhao Zhihong was executed in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. Chinese authorities did not announce the execution in advance, following standard practice for death penalty cases. The execution was carried out by lethal injection, which has become the standard method in China, though firing squad is still sometimes used. Before his execution, Zhao was offered a final meeting with relatives of his victims, a right guaranteed under Chinese law. However, Zhao declined this meeting. Whether this refusal stemmed from shame, defiance, or simply a desire to avoid facing the families of those he had killed is not known. It was a final act of cowardice from a man who had spent years preying on vulnerable victims. At the age of 46, nearly 14 years after his arrest, Zhao's life ended. The man who had terrorized Inner Mongolia for 9 years, who had raped 13 women and girls and murdered at least 10 people, was dead. But Zhao's execution did not end the story. The consequences of his crimes and of the justice system's failure to catch him earlier would continue to reverberate through Chinese society. The wrongful execution of Hugjilt had exposed deep systemic flaws in China's criminal justice system. It revealed how police quotas and political pressure could lead to rushed investigations and wrongful convictions. It demonstrated how the use of torture to extract confessions could send innocent people to their deaths. And it showed how a serial killer could continue murdering for years while police celebrated the conviction of an innocent man. In response to the scandal, the Supreme People's Procuratorate, China's highest prosecutorial body, published a statement on its official website. The statement acknowledged the failures in Hugjilt's case and called for comprehensive reforms. The Procuratorate announced that procuratorates across the country must form accountability systems to prevent more wrongful convictions. These systems would include stricter oversight of police interrogations, mandatory recording of interrogation sessions, and greater scrutiny of confessions obtained during custody. In October 2014, shortly before Hugjilt's exoneration, the central government in Beijing announced it would begin a comprehensive reform of the country's judicial system. While the reforms were not solely motivated by Hugjilt's case, his wrongful execution became a powerful symbol of why reforms were needed. The reforms included several key changes. Police would be required to record all interrogations in serious criminal cases, making it harder to use torture without detection. Defense lawyers would be given greater access to their clients and more ability to challenge prosecution evidence. Courts would be instructed to more carefully examine confessions and to exclude those obtained through torture. And judges would be given more independence to make decisions based on evidence rather than political pressure. Whether these reforms have been fully implemented and whether they have succeeded in preventing wrongful convictions remains a subject of debate among legal observers and human rights advocates. But the fact that reforms were attempted at all represented an acknowledgement that the system had failed catastrophically in Hugjilt's case. The case of Zhihong represents one of the darkest chapters in modern Chinese criminal history. His crimes terrorized communities across Inner Mongolia for nearly a decade, leaving at least 10 people dead and 13 women and girls raped. His victims ranged from young girls under 14 to adult women, demonstrating that Zhao's predatory behavior knew no boundaries of age or circumstance. Zhao's methods were consistently brutal. He favored rape, followed by murder, typically strangling his victims to death. This pattern suggests a killer who derived satisfaction from the complete domination and destruction of his victims. Unlike some serial killers who evolved their methods over time, Zhao remained consistent in his approach, indicating a fixed compulsion. During his trials, witnesses reported that Zhao would smile in the courtroom, earning him the nickname the Smiling Killer. This disturbing behavior suggested a man devoid of genuine remorse, someone who could remain emotionally detached even while facing judgment for his horrific actions. His courtroom demeanor shocked observers and added to his reputation as a figure of pure evil. Zhao's statement to China Central Television, "I am not me but another man when I commit crimes. At that time, I am as grim as devil," provided insight into his psychological state. This comment suggested a form of dissociation, where Zhao felt disconnected from his own actions during his crimes. Whether this dissociation was genuine or simply an attempt to evade responsibility is debatable, but it revealed how Zhao understood his own behavior. Psychologically, Zhao fits the profile of an organized serial killer. He was able to function in society, commit crimes without immediate detection, and evade capture for 9 years. He demonstrated the ability to plan his attacks, select vulnerable victims, and dispose of evidence. At the same time, his escalating frequency of crimes in 2005 suggested that his compulsion was intensifying and becoming harder to control. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of this case is not Zhao Zhihong himself, but rather the innocent boy who died for his crimes. Hugjilt's wrongful execution became a symbol of everything that was wrong with China's criminal justice system in the 1990s. The Xinhua news agency's description of the case as one of the most scandalous instances of injustice in China over the past decade captured the national sense of shame and outrage. Huugjilt was 18 years old when he found a body in a factory toilet and made the responsible decision to call the police. He was 18 years old when police tortured him into confessing to a crime he did not commit. and he was still 18 years old when he was executed by firing squad, just 61 days after doing what he thought was the right thing. His parents, Li Sanren and Shang Ayun, spent 18 years fighting to clear his name. 18 years during which they lived with the stigma of having raised a rapist and murderer. 18 years during which they knew in their hearts that their son was innocent but could not prove it. When they finally succeeded in obtaining his exoneration, they brought the official notice to his grave and burned it, their way of telling him that justice had finally been done. The compensation they received, over 2 million yuan, represented an official acknowledgement that a terrible injustice had been committed. But as Li and Shang made clear in interviews, no amount of money could bring back their son or restore the years they had lost to grief and shame. 27 officials were disciplined as a result of Huugijilt's wrongful execution. Reforms were initiated and promises were made that such miscarriages of justice would never happen again. But fundamental questions remain unanswered. How many other wrongful executions have occurred in China? How many other innocent people have died because police needed to meet quotas, because authorities demanded quick results, because confessions were obtained through torture? China executes more people each year than any other country in the world, though exact numbers are considered a state secret. In such a system, where speed and severity are valued over careful deliberation, the risk of wrongful executions is ever present. Hugjilt's case suggests that he was not the only innocent person to be executed, merely the only one whose innocence was later proven beyond doubt. Zhao Zhihong killed at least 10 people directly through his violent crimes. But in a broader sense, he claimed 11 victims, the 10 he murdered with his own hands, and the innocent 18-year-old boy who died for his sins. This is the true horror of his legacy, not just the lives he took through violence, but the life taken by a system that valued speed over truth, convictions over justice. The smiling killer is dead, executed on a summer morning in 2019, but the smile that truly haunts this case is not his alone. It is the smile of a system that allowed an innocent boy to be executed, that promoted the officers responsible for his death, that took 18 years to admit its mistake. That is the smile that China must erase, not through more executions, but through genuine reform, meaningful accountability, and an unwavering commitment to truth over expediency. Zhao Zhihong's crimes were monstrous, but the system that executed Hugjilt while the real killer walked free was perhaps even more terrifying. Because while Zhao was one man, one predator who could eventually be caught and stopped, the system was supposed to protect society from people like him. Instead, it became complicit in his crimes, giving him 9 years of freedom while an innocent boy paid the ultimate price. This is the legacy of the smiling killer. Not just death and suffering, but a mirror held up to a justice system that revealed its deepest flaws. The question is whether China has learned from this catastrophic failure, or whether more Huugijilts are waiting to be discovered, their innocence proven too late, their lives already forfeit to a system that prizes efficiency over truth. Final question: after hearing Hugjilt's story, do you believe the system has really changed since 1996? Or are we just pretending it has? Write your honest opinion in the comments. I read every single one. Let's talk about this.